No one saw this coming, certainly not Elon Musk. From a nation many global maps flatten into the margins, a voice rose that could redraw expectations for an entire continent. In August 2025, Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traore stepped onto the world stage and unveiled three breakthroughs most people assumed would debut in Silicon Valley labs or European research parks. First, a salt-to-fresh water system capable of delivering clean drinking water at scale. Technology with the potential to save lives across one of the planet's driest belts. Second, Africa's first electric military truck. Proof that energy independence is not a distant aspiration, but a machine already rolling across Sahel dust. Third, a real-time agricultural drone, able to plant seeds, scan soil in flight, and coach farmers toward record harvests. This was more than engineering, it was a declaration. A country with a GDP under $20 billion, choosing to leap into industries collectively worth hundreds of billions. While Wall Street argued about risk premiums and return curves, Ouagadougou offered a different metric: sovereignty through invention. The question wrote itself: are we watching the birth of Africa's own Silicon Valley? And if so, how fast will the world pivot or push back? Traoré framed the trio not as isolated wins, but as the foundation of a deeper doctrine. The era of dependency, he said, is over. The age when progress required donor approval, imported blueprints, and policy conditionalities has run its course. What Burkina Faso presented was not just hardware. It was a philosophy: solutions made in Africa, for Africa, by Africans. Consider the paradox. With no legacy auto industry, no mega factories, and a GDP smaller than a mid-sized European city, Burkina Faso announced advances many richer nations still struggle to deliver. How? Traoré's answer was disarmingly simple. When necessity meets discipline, innovation becomes survival. These tools didn't arrive via overseas grants. They were built by African engineers, scientists, and students who chose to trust their own capacity. The symbolism lands like a hammer. For decades, a neo-colonial script insisted Africa must wait, borrow, and import. Traoré flips the page. Africa does not need permission to innovate. By turning scarcity into design constraints, by treating constraints as creative fuel, Burkina Faso has drafted a manual for peers trapped in dependency cycles. It's why analysts quietly warn that if this model spreads, entire markets, from water tech to ag tech to defense logistics, could tilt. A continent long dismissed as resource-dependent might emerge as a hub of disruptive invention. So the real question is not whether the vision is bold, but whether we're prepared for what it unleashes. The inventions, in substance, not just symbol one: salt to fresh water, reimagined. Built to sip power rather than guzzle it, the system ships as modular units that villages can assemble and maintain locally. In the Sahel, where over 400 million people lack reliable access to safe water, this is not a luxury. It's an exit from perpetual crisis. The design emphasizes rugged parts, simple filtration stages, and on-site training kits. Fewer moving pieces, fewer breakdowns, more uptime. Each unit is a statement. Dignity begins at the tap. 2. Africa's first electric military truck. Silent, emission-free, tuned for heat and unpaved roads, the platform does more than move troops. It rewrites supply lines. An army that no longer chases imported diesel is an army with a freer hand. Batteries integrate with solar microgrids. Motors are modular for field swaps. Diagnostics run on rugged tablets. And maintenance crews can be trained locally in months, not years. Dual-use variants for humanitarian logistics and emergency response are already in the sketchbook, because resilience is a civilian need too. 3. A smart farm drone that does, not just sees. Most drones take pictures. This one works the land. It plants, maps soil moisture, flags pests, and recommends targeted inputs. Linked to a farmer app in local languages, it turns precision agriculture into everyday practice. In pilot zones, yields jump while input waste falls. Imagine the compounding effect as cooperatives share fleets. Agronomy students expand the playbook. In seed companies, calibrate varieties with live field data. The origin story that breaks a stereotype. These machines didn't roll out of a coastal VC campus. They came from public universities, vocational schools, army workshops, and farmer co-ops trading knowledge with engineers. Traoré's line, "We build because we must, not because we have money," isn't a slogan. It's an operating system. The desal unit wasn't designed for glossy expos. It was built to quench thirst. The truck wasn't polished for arms fairs. It was built to move without fuel convoys. The drone wasn't crafted for boutique vineyards. It was built for survival on fragile soils. Innovation, Burkina Faso demonstrates, is less about factory size than clarity of need. That philosophy punctures the heart of dependency. For half a century, Africa was steered into consuming appropriate technologies shipped at premium prices. By fabricating its own tools, Burkina Faso not only trims the import bill, it broadcasts a message. Sovereignty is minted in classrooms and labs as much as in parliaments. In Western capitals, the first response was a puzzled quiet. Coverage was thin, questions were many. Can a $20 billion economy really out-execute billion-dollar labs? Think tanks circulated cautious memos on technological sovereignty rising in Africa. The uncomfortable follow-ups came quickly. What happens to leverage if aid is no longer a choke point? What happens to market share if African users choose African tools? Across Africa, the mood flipped to electricity. Timelines lit with tags like hashtag Burkina model, hashtag Africa can build, hashtag Made in Africa. Student unions in Lagos, Nairobi, and Accra convened fast teach-ins on replication. Hackathons bloomed around ag drones. Engineers posted teardown analyses. Entrepreneurs began scouting local suppliers. A psychological wall, older than many of the people tweeting, showed its first cracks. On the ground, the early signals turned into numbers. In rural districts, the desal units correlated with nearly a 20% drop in waterborne disease admissions, more children in class, fewer clinic lineups. Precision planting via drone raised yields in pilot plots by up to 25%, while trimming input costs for smallholders. Defense electrification spilled into civilian use. Logistics units used the trucks for disaster response and vaccine cold chain runs, and STEM enrollment spiked. Some campuses reporting 40% jumps in robotics and power systems cohorts. Pride became pipeline. Crucially, Traoré didn't treat the inventions as museum pieces. His government braided them into a development model designed to dismantle dependency. New production centers, tech incubators, and vocational hubs spread across regions, not as elite showrooms, but as workspaces where farmers stand beside coders and retired mechanics mentor undergrads. Roughly $200 million in national funds has been reallocated to seed this network, an audacious sum for a cash-tight state, and precisely the kind of bet dependency says is impossible. Local cooperatives gained a budget line. Veteran engineers, sidelined by foreign-led contracts, were brought back in as master trainers. Standards were drafted so parts and skills travel easily across borders. The next step is bigger, a West African technology network for shared blueprints, pooled procurement, and joint R&D, because one nation can prototype, but a region can scale. Imagine even 10% of ECHOs adopting that spine. Supply chains shift, import bills shrink by billions. Diaspora remittances tilt from consumption toward co-ownership of factories and IP. The math pencils out, the message resounds. Global reaction quickly picked a name for the tremor: Burkina shock. For the first time in modern memory, the north to south pipeline of technology was visibly reversed. Western policy circles worried about lost leverage. Aid as a tool looks smaller if countries self-provision. Multinationals eyed the possibility of African buyers turning toward African brands, with combined water/defense/ag tech markets greater than $800 billion, facing new rivals adapted to heat, dust, and intermittent power by design. Meanwhile, African feeds celebrated the cultural pivot. Musicians riffed on Burkina tech. TikTok creators staged skits about building, not begging. Universities set capstone projects on local desal, EV drivelines, and drone agronomy. The most powerful invention, some said, wasn't a machine, it was self-belief. None of this is frictionless. Financing is lean. Supply chains for batteries and membranes need regional anchoring. Standards must be locked before cheap knockoffs flood the market. External pressure, economic, political, even covert, will test the model. Larger African economies could champion or smother it, and global incumbents threatened by competition may try to discredit, litigate, or undercut with loss leader pricing. But one myth is already gone: African technological inferiority. That door won't close. Rewind to 2023. Traoré launched a national self-reliance plan that refused the old crutches. No IMF strings, no dependence on multinationals to kickstart growth. The wager was bolder: mobilize domestic savings, reactivate dormant know-how, and bind national pride to hands-on problem solving. Commentators now call it the Traoré effect: technology and politics wielded together as instruments of liberation. That's why these inventions function as diplomatic credentials. The desal system attracts interest from water-stressed states in the Middle East. The electric truck earns inquiries from Asian defense ministries that need terrain-proven EVs. The ag drone draws attention from Latin American extension services fighting drought. In every conversation, Burkina Faso sits as a peer, not a pupil. Africa isn't just a consumer market. It is the storehouse of critical minerals: cobalt, manganese, lithium, uranium. Marry resource control to local manufacturing, and you don't just move up the value chain, you redraw it. Picture West African-built desal systems shipping to South Asia. Sahel-tuned electric trucks competing in rugged fleets worldwide. Tropicalized ag drones becoming standard kit from Para to Palawan. For Western corporations, that's disruption. For Africa, that's liberation. Diaspora investors, responsible for tens of billions in annual remittances, have already begun steering funds toward incubators in Ouagadougou and beyond. One New York bank estimated that a shift in sentiment alone could redirect $10 to $15 billion per year into African venture and manufacturing. French media worried aloud about losing a preferred partner status. Beijing praised a multipolar reality. Moscow framed it as South-South proof of concept. New Delhi saw alignment with its own development-first ethos. The West hesitated, skeptical of scale, wary of legitimizing a narrative it can no longer control. More than policy or product, culture is moving. For once, Africa is not reacting to the world. The world is reacting to Africa. Made in Africa is shifting from defiant sticker to default setting. Classrooms teach case studies in sovereign design. Co-ops pool savings for drones the way they once pooled for tractors. Pride, backed by practice, becomes capacity. The open questions: can Burkina Faso sustain momentum under tight budgets and external pushback? Will larger economies, Nigeria, Kenya, Algeria, South Africa, Egypt, adopt, adapt, and amplify? How do you defend a newborn industrial base against predatory pricing and IP capture? What happens when success triggers countermoves, sanctions, smear campaigns, or sudden surges of aid designed to rehook dependency? No one knows. But one fact is settled: the story has turned. If Burkina Shock becomes a shorthand in history, it will stand for more than 3 inventions. It will mark the moment a small nation announced a doctrine, sovereignty engineered. In place of borrowed models, a blueprint that ties dignity to design, policy to production, and pride to practical outcomes. Traoré's core message is plain: freedom isn't begged for, it's built. Those words travel far beyond Ouagadougou. They speak to drought-hit villages, to overcrowded classrooms, to youth told for years to wait your turn. The Burkinabe answer is simple: the waiting is over. This is not only about water, trucks, or drones. It is about authorship. For centuries, narratives about Africa were written in boardrooms and parliaments half a world away. Today, through circuitry and code, welds and welders, Africa writes in its own hand. There will be skepticism. There will be resistance. That's how you know you've touched the hinge. But if Burkina Faso can make dented budgets do the work of bloated aid, and do it without surrendering policy to lenders, what excuse remains for bigger economies with deeper pockets? Innovation is not the North's privilege. It is everyone's birthright. So share the story, teach it, replicate it, improve it. The revolution of ideas does not end in Ouagadougou. It begins wherever someone decides that Africa's future belongs first to Africans, and that sovereignty in the 21st century is a product you build.